Hey friends, welcome to Devlog number 3. Let's crack into it. There's been quite a few changes since I recorded my last devlog. I've added a back wall to each room, smoothened the movement on the camera and the player, I've added a failure state, I've modeled and animated a simple door and have it instantiating in the correct position in each room, and I've also been tweaking the values of the room size and the camera position, trying to find a balance that is both challenging and fair. I want the game to be pretty easygoing as soon as you jump in. I want there to be enough room for the players to understand what's going on and kind of work out how to play the game without the game being too difficult. If anything, I would like it to be a little bit too easy to begin with, but I do want the difficulty to ramp up over time so that people that have kind of mastered the skills involved with the game actually find some challenge and it's not too easy or boring for them. So finding that balance is going to be quite difficult. As I add more features like opening the doors with the switches, I'm probably going to have to continue to tweak these values. This is probably going to be a bit of an ongoing process, but I think it's a good thing to keep in mind for now. Speaking of new features, let's start talking about some of the things that I've added. We'll start with the back wall. Adding the back wall was simple as I already had the functionality for this. I just needed to plug in the extra wall and parent it to the room. I'm thinking that the back wall is going to serve multiple purposes. First off, it's going to give me a little bit more control in the look of every room. I'm probably going to add some colors to each room and make the game stand out a little more. I might even look into changing the colors of the rooms as the game gets harder so that you can physically see that the game is getting more difficult. Secondly, I think the back wall gives me a nice location to place some UI elements in a really central and creative way. If you've played any of the recent Splinter Cell games, you might get what I mean. In those games, they had upcoming objectives projected on the side of buildings and walls. I found this to be a really interesting way of displaying UI information, and I want to repurpose that for my game and use the back wall to display the amount of points that the player has and how many points they're going to get in the next room. I'll go into more detail when we actually go to implement this feature, but for now, just know I have some ideas on how I'm going to handle it. In my last devlog, I finished off the video with the camera movement working, but I wasn't quite happy with how smoothly the camera moved. I knew it wasn't going to be a lot of work to get it working how I wanted, and I was right. With a mix of moving the camera translation to fixed update and using vector 3.smoothDamp, I was able to get the camera movement to feel a lot nicer. Failure states are important in games. A game without a failure state is arguably not really a game. Fortunately, the failure state in this game is pretty obvious. If the camera moves beyond the player before the player can move to each room, the player loses. This wasn't too difficult to implement. I already had a lot of the building blocks for this in the camera movement. I just needed to check if the top of the screen was less than the Y transform of the player. I also added a threshold variable to add a bit of a buffer so I can control how much of a grace the player gets. The other side of the coin of failure states is victory states. Since my game is kind of in the endless runner genre, this is a little less obvious. I might have to look at adding some kind of leaderboard system to go with the point system, unless I can come up with another way to reward the player, show progression, and acknowledge the player's victory. Now, probably the biggest addition I made was adding the door. While the model for the door is just simple cubes, and I very easily could have gotten the same result with probably less effort just using Unity and scripts, I wanted to take this opportunity to dip my toes into Blender and try modeling something simple and creating some really basic animations. I have played around with Blender a little bit before, but I've never really gone beyond playing with the modeling tools. While what I ended up with is super simple, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out for my first run at animating. I'm looking forward to playing around with some more complicated models and animations in the future. After I finished modeling and animating the door, I was able to get it instantiating in its correct position fairly easily, but not without a few hiccups. The main one being that the reference to the door prefab wasn't being detected from me placing the door prefab on the serialized variable in the inspector. After some tinkering and googling, I found that the resources.load was going to be the easiest way to get this working, so I went with that. And now it works. But the problem with this is that recently I found out that resources.load is not a very good thing to use. I'm going to have to play around with this a little bit more and find a better way of doing it, but for now it works and I'm not too worried about it. I mentioned I was also playing around with the room size and the camera position for balancing reasons. I won't talk too much on this because I think I'll be playing around with it for a little while longer, so I might address this in my next video. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of when that devlog and future videos are released. Please also consider hitting the like button as it helps me get these devlogs out there. Thanks for watching this video. In the next one, we're going to take a look at those balancing changes adding switches for the doors and connecting the doors animations up, and maybe even getting a start on the point system. Until then, I'll see you later.